Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, everyone knows that a typical day for a clinical trial manager isn't always the most exciting. However, today I'll be sharing with you a get to the chopper moment from my day-to-day experience in rare disease drug development. But that's for later. So rare disease drug development really is a very exciting opportunity to be part of a movement for meaningful change. You'll find that you're working with teams from all different perspectives that are really coming together with the shared ultimate goal of furthering science to improve lives. So it's very easy to love working in this space, even though it's very challenging. Okay, so today we'll be going through what rare diseases are, and then different methods to making sure that from an operational perspective, you're applying lessons learned and maximizing the time in which you can complete the trial and, of course, get your data points that you need. Okay, so first up, what's a rare disease? I do just want to share that while rare diseases, you think there's not that many people out there that have them, this statistic really does show that there's a big market for drug development in rare disease. There's 350 million people in the world that have rare diseases. Definitions do vary across governments, as you've probably already heard. In the US, it's less than 200,000 people with the disease currently, as defined as in the Orphan Drug Act. And in Europe, you have a different metric, and it's 1 in 2,000 people, and it does have some caveats that are required to meet and get this orphan designation. And in Japan, it's 1 in 2,500. So there are countries with rare disease legislation in different areas, and we won't go into them too much, but it's just good to know that they're there. And we are continuing to see further legislation come out to provide more guidance on orphan drug development, and that's coming in Turkey, Canada, and China. Okay, so one thing that I think is a bit confusing is oftentimes people use rare disease and orphan disease interchangeably. But orphan diseases can encompass other diseases that are neglected with regards to treatment options. So this is common in third world countries. Okay, and again, we talked a little bit about just because it's rare doesn't mean that you haven't heard of it before. There are rare diseases that are very high profile. As you can see, the ice bucket challenge with ALS really raised a lot of awareness. We have cystic fibrosis, and progeria, which is premature aging in children, hemophilia, and homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. Now, there are also ultra-rare indications that we've worked in where there's just a couple of hundred people in the world, and sometimes it seems like the stuff out of science fiction movies. But to those people, their disease is something that they deal with every day, and they're very familiar with it. And you'll find teams of experts throughout the world that you'll be working with. Okay, something that comes hand in hand with rare disease drug development is oftentimes a focus in pediatrics. Half of people with rare diseases are children, and a third of orphan designation treatment options are for children. The death rate is quite high, so 35% of people with rare diseases die within the first year of life, and then almost another third are dying before their 5th birthday. However, we have made a lot of progress in the last several years. I think cystic fibrosis is a great example. You have patients that were dying before they reached adulthood, and now pediatric patients are living through adulthood. So that leads to trials that need to be designed to accommodate both pediatric and adult patients. And that does lead to some unique approaches that you have to take, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I did want to make you aware of some expedited development pathways that are available in the US through the FDA. There's 4 different tracks that we'll talk about today, and the first one is fast track. So you utilize your preclinical or clinical data to demonstrate the potential to fill an unmet need, and this can make you eligible for rolling review. There also is a class called Breakthrough Therapy, so preliminary clinical data that demonstrate improvement over available therapy. So this does give you a lot more face time with the FDA in designing your protocol and your endpoints to make sure that you're on the right track with what they're planning and willing to accept for approval. Priority review, so your application is reviewed in 6 months versus 10, which is something that everyone would love, and accelerated approval. So if you can demonstrate a meaningful therapeutic advantage and an effect on the surrogate endpoint predicting an earlier benefit, you are eligible for early approval by the FDA, and they do require post-marketing studies to verify the benefits that you were describing. Okay, this is a very busy slide that I don't expect you to read, but I wanted you to have it as a reference because the different approval pathways are quite complex, and our regulatory affairs put together this table as a good place for you to evaluate and start to see if one of these pathways would work for you, or multiple. There were 9 approvals in 2013 that used these pathways, and 2 of them used the breakthrough pathway, 5 of them used the fast track, and 4 of them used the priority approval. So as you can tell by the numbers, you can use multiple pathways for some of these approaches to help you get expedited approval. Okay, and then just one more stat before we leave this slide that I think provides a lot of hope in this area. In 10 years, so between 1973 and 1983, before there were a lot of legislation promoting rare disease drug development, there are only 10 drugs approved with orphan designation or in the rare disease space. And in 2013 alone, there were 33. So you can definitely see the strong focus from the regulatory authorities to really promote and provide support to these rare diseases. Okay, so there's also some additional incentives. You've got extended patent protection, and you have all these different pathways to help accelerate your timelines. Tax credits, annual grant funding, premium pricing, and you also can have funding from the advocacy groups themselves or patient networks, which is always helpful when you're developing drugs. Okay, so now we're going to get more into the operational side of things. So site selection and feasibility in rare disease is quite different from typical trials. You have a select group of individuals in the world who are experts in treating this disease, and those are the people that you have to work with. So when you're doing a qualification visit, you're going out to assess the site, and if you do find deficiencies, instead of just saying, oh, well, I'll just pick the next site, you really have to work with the site to overcome any challenges that you foresee so that you can successfully execute a trial at their location, because there really aren't a whole lot of options with where you need to go. So it's all about perspective. And there's a network of physicians that you're going to have to work with, and they have been incredibly supportive of a lot of development programs, and oftentimes are the ones that are telling you, oh, you've left out this person in this area of the world. We really think that they would be a valuable part of this trial. So talking with your key opinion leaders about where to go, who the big players are, is the best place to start. And you can also find a lot of information from registries. Every rare disease organization is set up a little bit differently, even across countries. But these registries can hold the keys to your trial. So some of them are so detailed that they can give you information on key inclusion-exclusion criteria and the number of patients in each area of the world that would meet that criteria and who their physician is that's treating them. So it's really easy to build referral networks with that kind of information in hand and also select your sites. Another great place to look is attending meetings where you know that the key opinion leaders are going to be, and always literature searches are helpful. You do also have to take a different approach with regulatory submissions. There are preferential pathways that are available in different parts of the world. Legislation is always evolving, and it's really nice to be able to have the expertise of someone who's working from that country and familiar with these types of organizations to make sure that you're taking advantage of all the programs that are available to you. The country to site ratio is rather challenging. There's typically a lot of countries that you're working in and not that many sites within those countries. So you'll find that you have a lot of submission work to do from a competent authority approval standpoint. And that's just because you need to expand your global reach, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to select a lot of sites in a particular country, because oftentimes those patients are traveling anyways to be seen by the expert in their area. And then we've been getting this very interesting issue and benefit to our enrollment where patients from countries that are not participating in the trial are contacting existing sites to participate in your study. This is very complicated. However, it is achievable to get these patients in most cases, and every single case is different. So this next slide is an overview of all of the different things that you have to consider. It's certainly not exhaustive, but each scenario presents unique challenges. Okay, but as you can see here, with proper planning and a strong infrastructure, it is possible. I was running a trial for a ultra-rare disease, so just a couple of hundred patients in the world, that requires treatment within days of having an event, so that made it extra complicated. And we had a patient from South America call us and say that they want to participate in our trial, and they were late in calling us, so we already had time shaved off the clock. This patient was very disabled and quite ill, so traveling is very challenging. We were able to remotely consent the patient and evaluate and see that they would, in fact, be a good candidate for this trial. So we decided that we would transport them to be seen at a site that was already open. And this proved to be a very exciting couple of days. We had first arranged for them to be airlifted out of South America to come to the U.S., and then learned that we were not permitted to do that without a lot of paperwork that takes a long time. So we ended up having to airlift this poor patient to Panama and then pick them up from Panama to bring them into the U.S. So that was definitely a lot of interesting logistics to work through. In the end, we did get this patient to the Northeast in the winter time, and as you can see on this list, winter clothing is not something that's typically considered, but something that you do have to provide. So just overall in orphan drug development, one of the most important things to have in your CRO is problem solvers and a flexible approach. So we were able to successfully treat this patient and provide them the comfort and safety that they needed in compliance with the regulations, but definitely a lot of work in the upfront. You'd think that you'd be all set after you arrange your visas, you have health insurance for them, you have done everything, and then it comes all the way down to the winter coat. Let's see. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is the power of a motivated investigator. We talked earlier about just how team-oriented drug development in this space is. This is a real example that I experienced. We had a local academic institution that typically took more than 100 days to get started up. However, with this particular investigator, we were able to get them approved and started up in 28 days. This was achieved through the doctor in charge really organizing their team and highly motivating their team to get things done. They even hand-delivered contracts to the signatory to accelerate contracting, and this is the type of thing that you see all the time in rare disease drug development. I've had contract attorneys ride a bicycle to the nearby hospital to hand pick up a document so that we wouldn't have to wait another day to activate the site. The element of teamwork is just unbelievable. So the next couple slides are going to be about recruitment. So social media, as you can see, is a very powerful tool. This graphic on the right here is one of my favorites. It is a list of the world's populations, and then inserted into that list is the number of users using different social media platforms. So you can see just how impactful things like Facebook really are. And so that's something that you do need to be aware of and be closely monitoring as a sponsor. The potential for unblinding is rare but possible, and something that you should be thinking about. The potential for misinformation, people just posting things that may not necessarily be accurate for your trial. But there are a lot of positive things that can be gained about this. You have the awareness of the community being increased. You have a support network for your patients so that they can support each other. And it's really a good opportunity for learning. So even if it is a slightly negative feedback, you can gain some important insights on how you could better run your trial real time instead of waiting for long-term downstream effects that you've missed out on. Okay, advocacy group interactions. Advocacy groups have been amazing partners in rare disease drug development, so really plug into that network and become a part of this group. Participate in their events, regularly update the community, and in return, you'll often find that the advocacy groups are following up with you to post more information about your trial on their websites. Registries we've touched on previously, but these are strong partnerships that you should develop, and then developing a referral network of investigators. So just like you are with the advocacy groups, really partner with the investigators even if you haven't selected them. Provide them with information on how the trial's going, and in return you'll find that they're much more willing to contribute patients to your study. And referral networks, once the PIs have exhausted their pool of patients, really have been the ones to help you meet your enrollment timelines in the end. Okay, so patient retention is also very important, and a big piece of this is really focusing on the patient experience. So a large focus of what we do in rare disease drug development is working on minimizing patient burden. There are very simple things you can do that can make people's lives a lot easier. That does include creating a schedule of events and also overlaying how long those events will take. So especially if you've got a pediatric trial, you've got a parent that knows, okay, this visit's going to take all day. It's all about setting expectations up front, and that really does help people not be surprised in a negative way about your trial. Tailor the assessments to minimize patient discomfort. So if you have a series of physical tests that the subjects are going to have to do, it makes sense from an endpoint perspective as well to really space those out so that you don't get subject fatigue and make sure that they're doing things in the same order. You can also utilize something as simple as a butterfly needle instead of a huge gauge needle to get blood from these patients. And a big part of this is to strategically plan this positive patient experience and reduce the patient and caretaker disruption from their life. So we've had partnerships with a lot of sites that have provided off-hours services. So, after 5 p.m., they're still willing to see patients, or on the weekends. This helps a lot with making sure that the subjects can participate in your study long-term. What we don't want is it to be such a fiscal burden that they can't continue and drop out midstream, because in rare disease, every data point is just so precious. Okay, so there is an effect that can become possible in rare diseases that are being studied quite a bit, and that's called trial fatigue or clinical trial burnout. So this is something that you want to try and avoid, and the way to do this is, again, the patient-centered experience. And what you need to do is make sure that you're providing patients with all the support that they need to make the trial less burdensome. And again, really training your sites to make sure that you maximize each data point that you collect, because there's just not that many out there. And PI and CRC involvement, so the coordinators and the investigators are truly dedicated to their patients. They've been treating them for years. This usually isn't a concern that I have. I've just seen them do incredible things for their patients, but making sure that they're feeling good about the study really does get that message passed along to the patient. Okay, common study execution needs. So anyone who's worked in rare disease before knows that there's a very increased level of collaboration between the CRO and the sponsor, which is a great thing. It's a partnership approach. Oftentimes, the sponsor comes to the table with a deep knowledge of the disease, and they're truly some of the world experts in that area. So the collaboration between the two has been great, especially amongst chief medical officers and our medical monitors. It's been really helpful. We also have found that there's a list of frequently required vendors that are needed in order to provide the patient-centered approach. Includes translators, call centers, home health care nurses. This has been huge. So if you do have a protocol that has a lot of visits, take a look and see if there's anything that you can do to minimize the patient's disruption from their work or life schedule. So if it's possible for a home healthcare nurse to do a lab collection at home, that really does help quite a bit with retention. And on-demand training services are also very helpful because a lot of times there'll be several months between enrollment of patients at a site level, so you want to make sure that the site, they have the support of their CRA to provide on-demand training services and also to also have this available on a web-based platform so that you can utilize that training when they need it. Okay, common study execution needs continue on to supply management. So oftentimes there are novel endpoints that require novel supplies, and sourcing those for larger studies can be quite challenging. So you want to make sure that when you're designing the protocol, you're aware of the availability of this equipment and how you'll actually get that done. We also find that there's a variable level of experience with industry-sponsored research at the site staff level. So oftentimes you'll have investigators that are experts in the disease, however, they're not experts in industry-sponsored research. So they require a tailored training approach where you focus a lot more on typical GCP than you normally would for a very experienced investigator. So again, just having that flexibility in mind when you're training those teams and develop a tailored training plan for each site. Also with novel endpoints, you need a tailored training plan for those. Oftentimes you're using a different group to perform these assessments, and you need to make sure that they're trained and have good documentation practices, knowledge, as well as GCP knowledge. We've also found that site teleconferences are unbelievably well attended in rare disease. The investigators and coordinators are all calling in and wanting to share their lessons learned. So it's important to make sure that you have the platform to encourage that type of communication. Okay. For monitoring, bolus recruitment is often commonplace, and here's why. With rare disease studies, you typically have investigators that have a known patient population, and they essentially line them up for enrollment as soon as the study is open. So you'll end up getting 5 patients all at once and then waiting several months before you get another patient again. We have a strong focus in enrollment planning, so we require sites to let us know exactly when they're bringing in each patient. And we arrange practice runs with them because oftentimes in rare disease, they're very complex protocols that involve a lot of people. So we find that there'll be a lot of difficulty in trying to coordinate all the different departments, for example, in arranging a single visit. And this dry run really helps them get that worked out before they have an actual patient. We also increase the monitoring frequency in this situation and the upfront just to make sure that sites are getting it right the first time before they've enrolled a bunch of patients. So it's definitely something that you need to consider when you're designing these trials. We also expect complex medical histories that are quite extensive. These patients have been followed for years and oftentimes are very ill. So we assign monitors that have that experience and training to make sure that they can actually wade through all those, and that does also skew monitoring work to the first part of the study. Okay, another thing to just keep in mind is we do provide training on how to do close oversight of investigational product accountability. We have seen that in inherited diseases, there is the potential, if one family member gets into the trial and another family does not, for investigational product sharing. So it's really important to educate the sites on how to detect this, and also, really counsel the patients on the importance of taking the drug as prescribed. Okay, so again, it's all about strong site support. A lot of times in lower enrolling trials, you'll find that you have coordinators assigned to multiple protocols. So you really need to make sure that they know who to turn to when they do have activities coming up in your study, and that the relationship between the CRA and the coordinator is really strong. Keeping that contact line open and keeping the relationship positive, passing along helpful information so that it's not just about we're contacting them whenever we want to speak with them. And just wanted to leave us all with a thank you, and let everyone know that February 28th is Rare Disease Day, and it's a great opportunity to show your support for drug development in this area. So there's the website to learn more. Thanks for your time.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions for Michelle.
Hi, thank you. For your clinical trials, do you ever set up a forum for patients to interact and share stories? And if so, how do you monitor, or what do you do when they report adverse events?
That has been a big challenge. What we've typically seen is that there's already forums and discussion boards set up that they utilize. So there wasn't really any interest in developing a new one in the drugs that I've worked in thus far. What we've done is asked the advocacy groups to be our partners to keep us informed of activities on the discussion boards and have periodic meetings with them, because oftentimes it's difficult for us to directly monitor because there's patient confidential information on the boards, like their name. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Todd, and I work for BioMarin, and we do a lot of rare disease trials and face a lot of the challenges that you brought up, mainly the patient logistics, because you got to get every patient you can. And in bringing a patient from a different country into another country, what's the model that you found most advantageous? Like, do you partner with the patient advocacy groups? Do you partner with patient, travel support companies? Or do you see CROs mainly taking a leader role in that?
Yeah, we found that it does take multiple groups to arrange that. So we've designed a program where the CRO is the point person to help arrange and organize all those groups. So the way that I've done it is actually call a team huddle where I get all the different players that would be involved in getting this patient to where they need to be, to discuss all the logistics and challenges and make sure that everyone's aware of the goals and the timelines that we need to meet. So that's been really helpful. Thanks.